So one of the forms of suffering is guilt. Um, and under guilt comes insecurity and lack of self-worth. And that's linked to attachment to outcome. Attachment to outcome means that the psychological self, the idea of ourself that gets put in place, is an idea that intrinsically includes within it, intertwining through the idea of ourself, part of the idea of ourself, that what I am is something that requires outputs or outcomes, circumstance, situation, to be a certain way in order for me to be complete and valid. So that attachment to outcomes is I am dependent on outcomes. I am dependent on life being good, on me being good. And if that is how we know ourselves, and for example, we grow up being told that we are not good, that we aren't doing things right, then what that means is that our sense of self is being challenged, is being attacked, is being invalidated. And that then means that we have a sense of self that assumes itself to be incomplete. This once again because the attachment to outcome says I need outcomes in order to be complete. And then through the course of life, outcomes are painful or not positive, not pleasure. So for example, parents, teachers, friends, telling us that, what we have done is not right. We're not, performing as a son well enough, or as a student well enough, or as a friend well enough, or as a part of a classroom. And all of that feedback is essentially outcome that is not adding to our sense of self, but rather taking away from our sense of self. And so we then go around with a sense of self that feels invalid, feels lacks confidence, and is basically threatened by life. Because at any moment, life can deliver an outcome that is an attack, at least is felt as an attack on who I am. And so once we're an adult, with this sense of self in place, what we might notice is something like you might be in a shopping center car park, parking your car. And let's say you take a corner a little bit too wide, and a car is also in the car park, so you're not driving fast or anything, and so there's no risk of death, but you pull into their lane, and they have to stop till you go around and what have you, and they look at you, they give you this look. Or you pull in front of a car that you didn't see coming, and you pull into the road in front of it, not any risk of serious injury, but you look in your rear vision mirror and the guy is like banging on the steering wheel or putting his hand up out the window or whatever. And essentially what that is saying is the person, all that's happened is an event, a circumstance, an outcome. And so you go, yeah, not ideal. I pulled in front of someone when I didn't have right of way, but no accident was caused or anything. But you see the person's face and gesture, and what it's telling you is, you have attacked me by delivering pain to me. you have taken part of my completeness away by delivering pain to me, i.e. pulling in front of me when you didn't have right of way. The reason that someone's response is like that is because they too have grown up with attachment to outcome that says, my completeness is to be found in outcomes. And so when you pull in front of them, that is a negative outcome from them. What they would like is pleasure, which is for everyone on the road to do exactly as they're meant to be doing. And you don't do that, so that's pain to them. And that triggers their sense of self that says, this is an attack on who I am. And so they respond towards you in a manner that says, you have attacked me. You have diminished me by delivering pain. And because we have, until it changes, the same idea, the same belief that our happiness is to be found in outcomes, when we see this, we believe them. We agree with them. We agree that, yes, I see that you have been feel attacked by what I did, and I buy into the same paradigm, which is my completeness is dependent on outcomes. And so then that person's response is seen by you as, one, an attack on who you are, because that's pain towards you. But more importantly, you see that that's actually caused because of your action of pulling in front of them, which is seen as delivering pain to yourself because of the consequence that it brings. And therefore, there is this lack of self-worth. And so this is how the dialogue goes on between humans, because they share this sense of self, which is based on outcomes. Now, the truth of the matter is, what we really are at our core is already complete, is already at peace. And circumstance is always going to be a mix of pleasure and pain. And our completeness, our essence, our beingness is not something that comes and goes depending on outcomes. So our true nature, let's say, is complete regardless of outcomes. And to the extent that we can start resting in that completeness, feeling that I am, even in the face of pulling out accidentally in front of someone, and cut off the narrative that says, as soon as we do that, oh yes, I have attacked you by delivering pain to you, and I've attacked myself by doing something that is not ideal, that is going to deliver pain in the form of their response. So I have attacked myself. So that narrative needs to stop. How does it stop? It stops when we realize, no, my completeness is not dependent on outcomes. Outcomes is a pleasure or pain. It's part of the flow of life, always either pleasure or pain. And our happiness, which really stems from a recognition of our completeness in this moment, a recognition that I am complete, that I have nowhere to go, nothing to do, nothing to prove, and that I am. And if we can rest there outside of the thinking mind, we find that all of the suffering, all of the uncomfortableness, which may be there as a default because we are, looking for our purpose in life and wondering when we're going to feel happy, and remembering the past with regret or blame, looking into the future with expectation and worry, complaining about the present moment. If all of that, which is all based on attachment to outcome, falls away, then we start experiencing what the present moment is like without all that narrative. And so to the extent that we drop into this being, we start to get experiential feedback. Experiential means not some concept, but actually the falling away of the uncomfortableness. When we come into presence with what is, which can mean dropping into the heart, into your essence, which really is the absence of going into the narrative. So you pull in front of someone, you look back and you see the person sort of banging their steering wheel or making a rude gesture at you or hooting the horn. And you understand, yes, I delivered pain in that moment. And pain is not an attack on who you are. We don't need to go and explain it to them. What we're really saying is we're reminding ourselves, no, I didn't just attack that person. They might think I did. They may respond internally for themselves as if I did. But no, I didn't. I just delivered circumstance which was not ideal, which was painful, let's say. And so when we see this response that says, you have attacked who I am, then there can be a compassion for it. An understanding that, yes, this is the response when the psychological me that includes in it this attachment to outcomes, this sense that I am dependent on life being pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. We can understand why that happens, but we need to keep reminding ourselves, no, my happiness isn't to be found in the flow of life, which is circumstance, outcomes. Your happiness isn't to be found in the flow of life. To the extent that we understand this, it becomes much easier for us to stick to our guns and do things that we feel like doing. When a partner or a friend or a work colleague or whoever might want you to do something different. And to the extent that you understand that if you don't do what someone else wants, that's at worst pain to them. And that pain is not an attack on who they are. If you believe that pain is an attack on who someone is, then it's much harder to not do what they want. And if we can keep remembering this, then we stop believing the story that people express to us when we have delivered pain. The story that they express is, you delivered pain, that is an attack on who I am. And then all the suffering, all the blame comes out. And so to the extent we can remain centered and understand, no, I didn't. I did something that delivered an outcome, pleasure or pain, accidental or intentional. Like, not intentional to deliver pain, but you might consciously have chosen, for example, not to go to someone's wedding or someone's party because it was in another country, or you had some other event on, or you were tired. And so you might have made that decision consciously, or you might have forgotten that the wedding was on, so it's accidental. And whichever it was, if they respond in a way that says, you didn't come, I hate you, you can remind yourself, well, actually, what happened is I delivered pain. And even when I say I delivered pain, it was destiny unfolding. It was my destiny to function that way, your destiny for the pleasure or pain to be delivered through my functioning. So your destiny and my destiny. Destiny unfolding. And this understanding is very important if we're not going to get lost in the story of horizontal suffering. Because when we do get into that story, we get into all sorts of justifications to try and counter the blame that is coming towards us. We think about why we did this and maybe we should have done it differently, and all of this horizontal thinking that, if it's understood, that was destiny, and at worst it's pain, and pain isn't an attack on who I am or who you are. And what I'm describing is not something we need to explain to the other person, because if you say that was destiny, it doesn't help the situation. It may antagonize the situation. That's that the understanding that life is destiny unfolding is there for one's internal attitude towards the circumstance, not to make the other person, to try and manipulate the other person so that they don't deliver pain to you, pain in the form of their blame or anger towards you. Now, if you receive it as just pain, it won't turn into suffering. So if your friend is upset, by all means, you can try and explain it in such a way that maybe they don't take it so personally. But once you've explained it, they either accept it or they don't accept it. Sure, you can explain it a second time if you think that will help. Because, let's say you delivered pain. It wasn't your intention to deliver pain. You just were being authentic, let's say. And you don't want to hurt your friends. So if you can do something to make them feel better, yes, by all means. Apologize by all means. An apology can be very welcomed and authentic. Regret or so an apology doesn't mean that you feel guilty. It just means that you recognize your actions delivered pain, and it's not your intention to hurt your friend. So you apologize. I'm sorry for the fact that my decisions, my choices, which is a happening according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning, are happening according to the story of life. I'm sorry, but you don't say that. You don't need to say that. I'm sorry that my actions delivered pain to you. It wasn't my intention. And that should be genuine. This is an important key of the piece of the puzzle if we're going to start being more capable of doing what we feel like doing. And doing what we feel like doing is important because the body is gives a lot of biological feedback as to what it would like. And in a lot of cases, we don't do what we would like because of a list of shoulds and shouldn'ts. And those shoulds and shouldn'ts, when we look at them, are very much linked to a strategy that we have, a psychological strategy of how to get most pleasure, which is once again playing into this identity of ours that says, oh, my happiness is to be found in pleasure. And so then the psychological identity sets up a psychological strategy of how to get pleasure, and that pleasure will never really, won't ever give us happiness. And because it's coming from the psychological identity, that movement of what we do, how we decide things, is never going to be authentic, because the psychological me that has the strategy is not authentic. It is a false sense of self. And so if we're functioning in life from our list of shoulds and shouldn'ts, which are part of a strategy of getting more pleasure, which is where we believe our completeness will be found, that means we're essentially reinforcing every time we make a decision from there. We're reinforcing and validating this sense of who I am, i.e. something dependent on outcomes. And we're essentially living life in a way that is not in flow, but rather sort of marching to the beat of the psychological drum. And so to the extent that that can be seen and dropped, or at least a movement towards doing less of it, and the alternative to me is to really ask yourself, what do I feel like doing? What do I want to do? Given the circumstance, so it doesn't mean, I want to sleep all day, and so you sleep all day if your circumstance actually requires you not to sleep all day. So you have to take in the full circumstance. However, be careful of how much fear and attachment is making up your assessment of the whole circumstance. And if you see that you, for example, really don't like your job, and yet there is this what's the word? Like a stagnation where you don't look for another job, or you don't consider that you could do things differently. You may be able to earn a living in a different way. And to the extent that you just remain hamstrung, thinking you have no other options, when in fact you do have probably other options. That's where we might find where we think, oh, I can't change jobs. And we might justify, I can't change jobs because I need to earn an income, pay the mortgage, look after the family. All of that is valid. But maybe you can do all of that and change jobs. So accepting that and recognizing that we have options in each moment. So an example that I used to use, haven't used it so far, is that in each moment we really do have options, and they are available to us, and our shoulds and shouldn'ts, our attachment to outcomes, tend to eliminate a whole lot of options that are really there. And one way of demonstrating this is that if someone were to, this would be unfortunate, but breaks into your house, a burglar, and threatens you and says, I understand you have some money upstairs in the safe, let's go and you'll open the safe and you'll give me the money. And you're standing downstairs, and let's say they have a weapon, and they say, come on, up we go. And in that moment, you do have a choice. You can say yes or no. Now, I'm not suggesting that I know which the right choice is. The point of the story is that you have, even with a gun to your head, should that be the case, you have choice. Yes or no. Our thinking sometimes says, I have no choice, I just have to say yes. That may be the best choice, but there are options. You can say no. And if you say no, you never know what the outcome is. The burglar might get rattled and say, no, this is not how it's meant to go, and lose their nerve and run out of the house. Or they might shoot you. And if you say yes, of course, we'll go upstairs, they might take the money and leave, and you might consider that a reasonable result. Or they might take the money and then shoot you. So the outcome is never in your control. What the point of the story is, you have options. In each moment, there are options. And to become consciously aware of these options and understand that if someone asks you out for dinner or for lunch or to help them, you have the option, yes or no. And we're often habituated to just say one thing as if it's the only option, because we're afraid. And so moving away from someone with a gun to your head, because that was just an extreme example to demonstrate that you can say no. There are options. I'm not suggesting you do say no, but just in the moment you consider it, it is an option. And then in other situations where, you get asked to do something at work, or someone asks you for lunch, and we might find that we say yes all the time. And then you might realize that makes you feel uncomfortable. It's not really what you want to do. And so it's about time to say, well, actually, I can change this. I can do it differently. And that might mean saying, well, I actually don't feel like it, so I have to be able to say no. And that then may show you that there is another way that feels more in flow with life. Probably because the attachment to outcomes, the fear of a negative consequence, with the belief that a negative consequence is an attack on who I am, that fear may have fallen away. Why will it have fallen away? Only when we realize, no, even if if that person responds badly to my no, that at worst is pain, and that is not an attack on who I am. So with that framing, it becomes easier to do things that we may have been afraid to do in the past, psychologically afraid to do in the past. And if we're convinced that our happiness is to be found in someone liking us all the time, or there only being pleasure, then we won't be able to do something that we consider may deliver us pain on one level. It will deliver us pleasure on the other level, because we won't be going out to dinner, let's say, or to a movie or on a holiday or whatever, to a place that we don't feel like going. And I suggest that the more that we start making choices from this place, the less negative consequences that there are compared to what we imagine. People tend to understand, tend to get over it. So we find that life actually works out quite efficiently. It doesn't end up being as problematic as we might imagine, so it's worth trying that. And then we find out that this load of uncomfortableness based on doing what I should do rather than what I feel like doing also falls away. And as we start getting positive feedback from living that way, then we do it more often. So that's something that I would suggest that you can try. And if you try it and you find that, oh, that is such a relief, then you would go into make bigger and bigger decisions based on what you feel like, rather than what you should and shouldn't do. And I wouldn't expect that you can make big decisions based on what you feel like straight away, because it's counterintuitive to some extent, because the belief is that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And so if we have to make a big decision that goes against what I should do, the fear may be too much to overcome. But as you start making smaller decisions from this place and get used to it, then there's a graduation from smaller to slightly bigger, and then bigger and bigger decisions. Speaker. So we'll go to some questions and see what comes up. Hi, Holger.
Hello, Roger. Nothing specific on my mind, just lots of peace and gratitude and thanks. And I really love your words, suboptimal. It really feels good in me.
Mm-hmm. I didn't use it today, though, did I? Or you're saying in general? When I use it?
In general, it's such a beautiful word. I mean, it's so open. There's so much space in it.
Yeah. So to put it in context for people, I often say that, if we find ourselves functioning where there is the sense of doership and attachment to outcomes, it's not our fault. It's part of our design in that moment, our genes and up-to-date conditioning, let's say. But if we understand that that can change, if life delivers certain new conditioning, that can change. And when it does change, we realize that the old way of functioning was suboptimal. Now, not attributing any doership to it, but just a simple objective comparison or assessment. And so I think that this really is a movement of human evolution from, let's say, living life with the psychological identity. We've figured out a whole lot of things in life. We've figured out how to build worlds where we're much safer than we were hundreds or thousands of years ago. And now we're looking at being able to survive, not just survive, but survive happily, and that is a more optimal state compared to just surviving but unhappily.
The thing was yesterday's satsang, it really was a big blow to my seeker. It was very humbling because I really, at one point, had no interest anymore in thinking. I mean, it was such an opening, such a space of relaxing and just to let God's will be. This was wonderful. Because I don't have the capacity to follow you. I mean, there was so much models and something, and I'm really not interested in models. I mean, I'm really like a totally simple peace of mind in daily living, independent of circumstances. And for sure, this is itself also a model, but it feels so good. There's so much space, so much ease in this, and this is good enough for me. I don't need to know if there was anything 13 billion years ago, because all of this is just the boundary of my thinking capacity.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, actually, I could put forward 3 or 4 different models, and I couldn't tell you which one is the right one. And actually, the models are only relevant because hopefully they point to, all the models include this characteristic of awareness and consciousness. And all of the models show us that really when we understand them, we're not the doer. So the point of talking about the different models is not to try and say you have to understand which model it is and decide which one it is and understand all of the components, but rather, hopefully, the models can bring us to what is important, which is the fact that I am now. Why I am now, I can't exactly tell you. Where I come from or where I am, I don't really know in a definitive sense. What I know is I am here, and here is, at the moment, in a room, in let's say, the environment of Earth. And that's good enough. Knowing all of the fine details is just confusing and superfluous at some point. However, the models are mentioned because often we aren't here aware of the fact that I am. And so I guess I would hope that sometimes the models bring us to that. But if you don't need the models, then that's even better.
But maybe that's just the suboptimal use of my thinking, because I'm too eager or too invested to find something in the model.
Yeah.
I mean, I need to be maybe more playful or open, just to enjoy the model instead of putting my egoic teeth into it, trying to find something, to gain something out of it.
Do you get challenged because essentially I say there is really no God in a godlike sense as it's traditionally used, and I know that I sense that certain religious contexts are important to you. So does the component...
I mean, I really don't care. I don't care about the limitations of my thinking. I mean, I don't want to be trapped in believing or hoping, because we can believe and hope whatever we want. And I don't believe in a God as a Santa Claus somewhere, so it's more like an impersonal functioning. This is all very wonderful. I mean, and I really appreciate your talking, and I learn a lot from it. Yesterday was so beautiful. I got the book from Ramesh, Who Cares?
Oh, yeah?
They really enjoy it. Yes.
Ah, that's good. I think that was one of his it's one of the most powerful points. Is, often I remember there was a lady, an Indian lady in Mumbai. I have a recording of it somewhere, and she kept asking about personal effort and karma and working hard to gain something, and you could see that it was part of her path at that point in time. And Ramesh said, who is doing all of this hard work, and who is going to get the merits of the hard work? And her response is, well, I am. Let's say her name was Sangeeta. Sangeeta, who is Sangeeta? Who? And the reason he was asking that is that, the assumption is, when the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership is there, and it isn't seen that the human being is essentially a result of genes and up-to-date conditioning, and we're functioning more or less automatically according to our design, which doesn't take anything away from the experience of life. Just because we describe it that way doesn't take away from the depth of experience, meaning all of the emotions and the thoughts and the feelings that are human. So love is a feeling, but that is a result of our genes and up-to-date conditioning. So describing it as genes and up-to-date conditioning doesn't diminish or reduce life to something less than it always has been. However, when that notion hasn't been presented and seen by someone, then there is this idea of a separate, independent me that is the doer. And this who is doing all the hard work is really trying to point out, we're convinced that there is a me controller. And when you look at it, there is the biological instrument designed by life, a circumstance that instrument finds itself in, and then a functioning. And this me is an overlay, and when we look into it, we find there is no me, there is no one making effort, there is just the functioning of the instrument. So this who is making the effort, that's the who of the who cares, who is it that cares about what happens in the world? Ramesh would say, God created the world, let God worry about what happens to it. I think if the point that's being made is overlooked, someone might hear it and say, that's very irresponsible. But there's great insight that there's much more wisdom, or much more to gain by understanding that than there is to lose. Because the truth is that the attitude of doership isn't what will make us responsible or irresponsible in terms of, let's say, the environment. The attitude of doership just means that we will see that when we are responsible, that will be because of our biological preference, and not because of our attitude of doership. So it's very important to go past the attitude of doership, because that's what obviously creates all the suffering. We believe that it's what makes us function, responsibly, but the truth is, when that doership falls away, we still will function responsibly, because our biological preferences don't fall away with the falling away of the attitude and personal doership. So, who cares? Enjoy it.
There is something in the back of my mind. You mentioned like self-massage some time ago, that
Yes.
there was a delay between you massaging muscles and then some hours later there was some emotional release.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a delay between cause and effect.
Yes.
What about in life if all of our circumstances are just the effect of our own attitude?
The circumstances are an effect of... Well, that would make the teaching completely invalid then.
Wonderful. Okay, good. Okay, I leave it right now. I have to think about it.
Yeah.
Because it's just Mr. Jesus says, I of my own self can do nothing. It is the Father who does the job, which is this non-doer, which fits into the teaching.
Yeah, that I agree with. But our attitude is specifically related to the suffering or the peace as opposed to the circumstance. And if I heard you correctly, you said, what if...
No, then I maybe mean attitude in a deeper sense, more related to my uniqueness, not to the circumstances. So because it says, when you pray, believe that you have received already.
Right.
And no, forget about this one. Whatever you ask in my name, my Father will give unto you. Just as an example. So, and my name is just I am in my understanding.
Right.
Your pure sense of being. So if, in a way, satsang lifts us up. It lifts us out of our little me misery. It opens up our sense of being.
Yes.
And isn't there a direct relationship between our circumstances, maybe not immediately, but in the near or distant future, that this just reflects itself? So there is a movement out of this inner openness of saying yes to life, and then automatically life reflecting us, our own attitude.
There's a paradox. So yes and no. I think it's important to see that, for example, if our attitude changes, we may not express hatred in the same way. And if we're not expressing hatred in the same way, then it makes sense that expression of hatred might flow into circumstance, and then circumstance will unfold along that path. So yes, if our attitude changes, then our circumstance to some extent is down the track, theoretically going to be different. And on the other hand, it's important for us to bear in mind that our happiness is always to be found in relation to our attitude to circumstance, and to keep a separation between the two. So there is the circumstance, technically refers to the biological reaction and not any of the psychological reactions. However, because the psychological reactions are usually defined as internal, essentially, guilt and blame that are expressed horizontally after the fact. Or not expressed, but felt horizontally after the fact. So outside of or after the event, after the interaction has happened. So that's what's often referred to as the psychological suffering. And so I think it's important for us to keep the horizontal psychological suffering separate from the interaction between two people, which we could call circumstance and biological reaction. However, technically, this is why it's a paradox, within the interaction, if there is someone with the attitude of doership, the interaction itself may well be infused with a different content. So that's why I say it's a paradox, because we have to be able to hold it in both ways. primarily because it's so important to remember, actually the suffering that falls away is always our attitude to what happened in the past and our attitude to what might happen in the future. So I hope that's clear.
Underlying is our sense of being.
Yes, in the absence of
So,
the attitude of doership, that's what we're left with.
and this what I mean, that our sense of being resonates in life and creates circumstances.
So yes and no.
Why not?
Same. Well, only because it's very important to keep the being or the peace relative to attitude. At the end of the day, attitude and circumstance are not two. They're not separate. They are one. It's all one mix. But conceptually, we divide them into circumstance and attitude, and it's very important to divide it. Otherwise, we end up with the human condition, which is not being clear that there is a circumstance and an attitude to circumstance. And that's where we start off, where the two are mixed, and it's a big mess. Because it means that we have an attitude to circumstance of attachment, which means the circumstance and the attitude seem like one arising. So it is very important to separate them. To me, it's the core of peace of mind setting in, for there to be a recognition that there is circumstance, and then there is my attitude to the circumstance, which is really an internal thing. And if we get too technical before that separation of the attitude and the circumstance happens, then it gets in the way of that separation. And so to throw in that your peace of mind determines circumstance may technically not be incorrect. However, we also have to hold very clearly that circumstance is going to be whatever it's going to be, whatever is destined, and your suffering or your peace of mind is always on the layer of your attitude to circumstance. So, for all intents and purposes, we can just say the circumstance, the flow of life is what is destined. It will be what it will be. So you're not wrong, but I'm saying be careful not to only take that view, otherwise it may get in the way of becoming very clear that peace of mind is attitudinal, and the attitude is the attitude of doership and attachment to outcomes.
Just to use it as a model playfully and not to be stuck with it.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Holger. Hello, Tina.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Servus. I'm so happy finally I made it on time. I always listen to your satsangs, but in a different at a different time. And
Right.
I was always keen to ask you some questions, but then those questions dissolved because you answered them already during the next next week's satsangs. So I went through quite a journey during all your daily satsangs, and I felt that supported by the lockdown, my doership felt quite away. not totally, but to a huge extent portion.
That's nice to hear.
And yeah, it was great, and I felt such a relief. And I also was able to get rid of the most portion of my shoulds and shouldn't. So I stood on the sofa until I got the pling to do something. I resisted to do something just because it's a routine or because I should do something. And I couldn't even live with my bad feelings about it. And I really went through that process and was quite happy with the relief it caused.
That's a good word, isn't it? Relief. I think that's one of the better words to describe the change that happens.
Yeah, to me it was a relief. But then life started again, work started bothering me. So the conditions didn't stop, of course. And back and forth. Anyway, this morning I wake up with the feeling, or with words for the feeling I'm carrying for a week now, which feels like unsatisfied or boring or something is irritating me. And I used to start it. I wanted to check myself, and as a scientist, I love tables. I created a table which, whenever something irritates me, I try to identify what it is, and then to label it, whether it's blame, shame, pride, worries, and expectations, to really see where are the pain points for me still. And I couldn't get these feelings from the last 3 or few days. But this morning I got some words for it, and I think it's due to it feels like I lost the spice in my life. I have freedom, I have peace, but what motivates me to do anything anymore? And even all those things which I created and liked during the last weeks, during the lockdown, are gone again. So I like to sketch, I like to dance, and even that is it's not getting me anymore so much. So I was wondering, so I'm back on my sofa waiting for an inspiration to do anything, and I don't know what. It all seems so kind of senseless or dissolved somehow.
There is a stage, we could say, that is referred to as the spiritual desert. And that I don't know if this is what you're experiencing, but it's the sort of point where our attachment that drove us to do certain activities is seeing actually these activities are not where my happiness is to be found. And so a component that used to give us a motivation to do certain things has fallen away. But that component falling away is not such a bad thing, because it's the psychological component that was driving those activities. And for a while we find, and I think it's got to do with the process creating space, where you just don't feel like going out, you don't feel like a lot of things that you used to do. It doesn't. You might feel, why make the effort? It's pointless. It takes effort to get dressed up and whatever. And you say, what am I going to get for it? Maybe I'm just getting an ego boost. And that might have been valuable in the past, and because we weren't seeing what it was. And now we say, it's not worth it. And so this spiritual desert is sort of where you've left one shore, the shore of indulging in pleasure, because you think that's where the fulfillment will come from. And yet you haven't quite got to the other side where there is a more innate fulfillment. And at some point in the middle, it just feels like, what's the point? Yeah, and a flatness even.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that, and in hindsight, it was a phase, and it was useful in a way because it kept me indoors. It allowed things to come up. There was a space. There was less distractions. It wasn't the most comfortable time because of exactly this, the fact of what I'm speaking about. So some uncomfortableness would come up, some questioning. However, it did have an end, and what replaces it is this sort of more self-contenting feeling. But on top of that, a motivation, which is your biological preferences, come back in, and then suddenly it's, oh, I do feel like going dancing, or I do feel like going out with friends again. So I'm confident that the mojo will come back.
Yeah, thank you. At least I'm always it's a good exercise to remind myself to even be with that feeling. So even that feeling doesn't make me suffering, because I think, well, that's the way it is. So what shall I do?
Yeah.
It's part of my destiny, and so it really works. Yeah, and then I try to analyze what motivated me in the past. So usually it was seeking for love, or being liked by somebody, or being, appreciated or chosen, and that's kind of gone. I like it, but I'm not running after it, and it happens or it doesn't happen. That's fine. The other thing was painting and dancing, was getting into a flow and stop thinking, and I think I can do that now without the effort of dancing. And also to get rid of my pain, and that has dissolved as well, mainly. So I don't need to exercise or do certain things to get rid of it. So the past motivations are kind of gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so I'm looking for the new ones then.
yeah, but I think what you've described is very encouraging, because it sounds like some very important attitudinal shifts have set in, and I'm very confident that the rest sort of balances itself out, and I find that there are projects that we find ourselves then motivated to do, things we enjoy, that become part of our meaning in life. Definitely, to me, the most important part is the peace of mind, because if you're doing these things, which I say will come back in, if the peace of mind isn't there, then there's no meaning in doing those things, because we're doing all this stuff, but at the same time feeling uncomfortable with ourselves. So I definitely think that the fact that the suffering has come to an end is the most important part, and then the rest is just a bit of cosmetic change.
I started with high motivation, trainings on energetic body work and coaching sessions and so on for the 2-year trainings, and going there now. And I was so excited with being close with these people, all this transformation work, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm sitting there and I think, well, I can do that. But so the excitement is gone, and that scares me a little bit. But I'm trusting the process and wait for the next things to come. Thank you very much, Roger. I'm very grateful for your daily talks. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Goodbye. Okay. Well, thank you, and enjoy your day.